So the court has considered the arguments made by the attorneys. The court has considered the statements made by the victims in this case. The court's going to find that the plea agreement is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. I want to acknowledge the Rusick family as well as the Watts family that showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood, and I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances. Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime.
Unlock the darkest stories and unravel the mysteries with Dark Crime Box. Subscribe now and step inside the world of true crime like never before.
And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could objectively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. And nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to counts 4 and 5 relating to Bella and Celeste as a different theory of first-degree murder, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections, and legally those sentences must run concurrently as a different theory of first-degree murder. Recognizing the unlawful termination of pregnancy for the unborn child that has been named Nico, the court absolutely believes that the maximum sentence of 48 years would be appropriate to run consecutive to the other charges, with an additional mandatory parole period of 3 years as set forth by statute. With regard to count number 7, as it relates to tampering with a deceased body, as well as counts 8 and 9, each a class 3 felony, the court is going to impose a maximum sentence of 12 years each for those counts to run consecutively to the other counts. The court is going to order that the statutory fees be paid and court costs. The court's going to grant the prosecution 91 days to file a notice of restitution, and that will be the sentence of the court. We will shortly be in recess. I would respectfully ask the parties that you remain in your seat. There is a plan by the deputies on allowing people to exit the courtroom, so please remain seated until you are authorized to leave the courtroom based on the direction of the deputies. Deputies, I would respectfully ask that you take this defendant into custody and have him serve the rest of his life in the Department of Corrections. We are in recess.
The rumor began like a spark in dry grass. Anonymous, directionless, whispered in corners of the internet that feed on fear and fascination. A single sentence posted at 2:13 a.m. on a crime forum. Chris Watts is saying he's coming out soon. No source cited. No details. Just a line that should have died in the noise. But it didn't. Within hours it spread across threads, comment sections, and late-night TikToks. Screens glowed in dark bedrooms around the world as true crime audiences froze mid-scroll, rereading the words that felt almost impossible to imagine. A man serving multiple life sentences, hinting at release? Most dismissed it instantly, but some didn't, because with Chris Watts, the horror never truly ended. It just went quiet. The internet revived it again. Before we begin, if you're new to Dark Crime Box, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime. Your support keeps these stories alive. So hit that button, and let's step into the shadows together. The rumor continued to grow, creeping into mainstream searches until it became impossible to ignore. People weren't just asking if he was getting out. They were asking how on earth that could ever be possible. Because the story of Chris Watts is one of the most haunting, devastating cases in American true crime history. One that carved itself into the public consciousness with a brutality that still lingers, like a house where the lights were left on long after everyone inside was gone. The images return again and again. The empty Colorado suburban street at dawn, patrol cars quietly rolling to a stop, officers stepping out into the cold air as if entering sacred ground. The house with the neatly trimmed lawn, its silence unnerving, almost rehearsed. The front door swinging open to reveal a world that should have been full of life, toys, laughter, chaos, but instead felt like a stage after the final performance, abandoned and hollow. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. No signs of forced entry, no desperate struggle, just absence, heavy, suffocating absence. This was the scene officers walked into on the morning the Watts family was officially reported missing. This was the moment everything changed. To millions watching news alerts pop up hours later, it looked like a tragic missing persons case. A mother, 2 children, a family that vanished without explanation. But beneath the headlines, beneath the scripted concern and polite interviews, something darker pulsed. Something that couldn't be named yet, but was already felt. You could see it in the footage recorded that day. The body cam view drifting through empty rooms, lingering on tiny shoes, unmade beds, and baby dolls resting in silence. Every detail felt like a question, every object a whisper. The home felt wrong, not chaotic, but curated. Too still, too clean. And in the driveway, standing with his arms folded tightly across his chest, was a man whose face the world would soon learn to dread. Even before the truth surfaced, viewers described an instinctive sense of dread watching him. Something about the way he shifted his weight, the way his eyes drifted toward the house, the way his voice carried just a little too smoothly for a husband whose entire world had just disappeared. But officers didn't know that yet. Friends didn't know that yet. The world didn't know that yet. What they knew was simple. A pregnant woman and 2 children were missing, and every minute mattered. When police left that home for the first time, they didn't know they were walking away from a crime scene crafted with chilling precision. They didn't know the truth was buried in places no one would think to look. They didn't know that the smiling husband pleading for help was hiding something that would shock the entire planet. The case would unravel quickly, almost violently, over the days that followed. But in that first moment, standing under the harsh Colorado sun, investigators were stepping into a story that would dismantle the illusion of picture-perfect suburbia and expose a darkness most people still struggle to comprehend. And now, years later, the idea that this same man, the man who confessed to one of the most horrific family annihilation cases in modern history, might be whispering from behind prison walls that he is coming out soon, reignites something people thought they had buried: fear, anger, curiosity, and the unsettling realization that even monsters locked away for life continue to cast long shadows. Whether the rumor is a lie, a misunderstanding, a misinterpreted comment from an inmate, or something more calculated, remains to be seen. But the timing, the tone, and the chilling confidence behind it have reopened the door to a nightmare many hoped would stay sealed forever. Before we go deeper, if you haven't already, hit that like button. It helps this channel reach more viewers, letting us continue telling these difficult stories with respect, accuracy, and depth. Because to understand why this rumor rattles people today, we need to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the life that looked perfect from the outside. Back to the storm brewing behind closed doors. Back to the moment when everything started to fracture. Long before the horror became headlines, the Watts family was known for something else entirely. A picturesque life that seemed carefully arranged for admiration. Their home in Frederick, Colorado, stood like a postcard. Suburban symmetry, trimmed grass, warm colors, and an American flag that moved gently with the breeze. To neighbors, they were the model of young family success. Stable careers, healthy children, and a marriage that appeared to glow with affection. Social media only polished the image further. Videos of two little girls giggling in bright rooms, Shannon smiling through pregnancy updates, family outings bathed in warm filters and Sunday sunlight. Every post seemed to say, "We are happy, we are whole, we are building something beautiful." It was the kind of digital portrait people double-tapped without thinking, never imagining the darkness creeping quietly behind the scenes. Chris Watts played the role well, soft-spoken, calm. The kind of man who blended perfectly into the quieter corners of life. Co-workers described him as steady, predictable, the type who clocked in early and left late without a hint of complaint. He wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, wasn't the type anyone would associate with danger. Shannon, on the other hand, carried an energy that filled any room she entered. She was passionate, organized, driven. Someone who believed in documenting everything, sharing everything, celebrating everything. Her stories, her daughters, her marriage. They all lived online in little squares that millions would one day revisit with a sense of disbelief. But even the brightest homes cast shadows. Behind the curated smiles and tidy living spaces, stress slowly etched its way into the marriage. Financial strain pressed down harder each year. Expenses rose. Medical bills towered. A growing family meant more responsibility, more uncertainty, more pressure to stay afloat. The stress didn't explode. It eroded the way water dissolves stone one drop at a time. And then came something no camera ever captured. Emotional distance so quiet it almost felt gentle. Chris began to drift. Not in arguments or confessions, but in silence. It was subtle at first, so faint that Shannon might have dismissed it as exhaustion or work-related distraction. But the distance widened, day by day, until the man she had married began to feel like a stranger living in the same home. Friends noticed a shift even if they couldn't name it. Shannon, once open and expressive, started sharing little frustrations masked as jokes. Tiny moments where she hinted things weren't as perfect as the pictures suggested. The sparkle in her videos remained, but there was something else behind her eyes. A tension, a weight, a quiet storm gathering. Chris, meanwhile, slipped deeper into secrecy. His phone became a shield, his gym routine an escape. He transformed physically, emotionally, mentally, reinventing himself piece by piece as though shedding an old identity. Every new change widened the gap between him and the family he once promised to protect. The world didn't see any of this at the time. What they saw were photos of vacations, themed birthday parties, and smiling daughters who trusted their father completely. No one could have guessed that the unity captured in those images was crumbling silently behind the walls of that Colorado home. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Shannon made repeated efforts to hold everything together. She handled the household, the kids, the pregnancy, the financial strain, and the emotional distance she couldn't quite define. She was fighting for a marriage she didn't know was already being abandoned. And she was doing it alone. While she traveled for work that summer, the disconnect sharpened painfully. Texts were shorter. Calls felt colder. The man she loved was slipping away, but she didn't know why. The answers were hidden in a private world he built carefully, one that excluded her entirely. Every relationship leaves a trail of red flags, but most are so small that they blend into the background. Most go unnoticed until they're held under the harsh light of hindsight. And with the Watts family, those red flags weren't explosions, they were whispers. A husband who seemed too calm. A father who grew increasingly detached. A man who reinvented himself overnight. Physically, emotionally, psychologically. Whispers like these rarely predict violence. They usually fade. But in this home, they didn't fade at all. They gathered, circled, and hardened into something unimaginable. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Watts family represented the American dream. Love, stability, a future unfolding one milestone at a time. But inside that dream, fractures formed quietly and spread like hairline cracks across glass. At first invisible, and then impossible to ignore, because a storm was coming. One that would destroy everything. Before we move into the next chapter, if you're still here, take a second to like this video, subscribe to Dark Crime Box, and hit the notification bell so you never miss when the next case drops. Your support keeps this channel alive. Thank you. The warning signs had been there, scattered like crumbs leading to a truth no one wanted to believe. The emotional withdrawal, the sudden physical transformation, the secrecy that clouded every late-night message and carefully deleted digital trail. As summer pressed on, the red flags grew louder, but they were drowned out by routine, obligation, and the hope that things would somehow return to normal. While Shannon tried to keep her family from slipping apart, Chris drifted deeper into a world built on lies. His double life expanded in silence, and with each hidden choice, he stepped further from the man he once appeared to be. What looked like renewal from the outside, confidence, fitness, independence, was actually a shedding of responsibility, morality, and conscience. The fault lines beneath the marriage widened until they could no longer be concealed. When the crime was finally committed, it was carried out with a coldness that left investigators stunned. The destruction of a family is always horrific, but the calculated nature of this act, the betrayal of trust so complete it felt almost unreal, shattered any illusion of humanity in the man responsible. What followed was a cover-up steeped in panic and arrogance. A man believing he could trick not only the police but an entire nation. A man who underestimated the power of forensics, body cam footage, digital timestamps, and the unwavering intuition of investigators who sensed the truth long before he admitted it. The investigation unfolded rapidly. Every lie unraveled under scrutiny. Every inconsistency drew new eyes. Every piece of digital evidence pointed to the same horrific conclusion. Search teams combed rural fields under scorching sun. Crime lab technicians examined fibers, soil, and timelines with unblinking precision. Detectives watched hours of footage, dissecting body language and behavior that never matched the narrative he tried to sell. It was a race against deceit, but the truth always had more weight. When the confession finally came, it was less an act of remorse and more an inevitable collapse. The courtroom chapter that followed was filled with a heaviness that lingered long after the verdict. There was no trial, no dramatic confrontation, only a quiet acknowledgement of guilt and a sentencing that ensured he would never walk freely again. Multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Justice delivered swiftly, though it could never restore what was lost. Outside the courtroom, the world grieved with a family stripped of everything. The community mourned daughters who would never grow older, a mother whose life was stolen before she could welcome her unborn child. Candles burned along sidewalks. Photos fluttered in the breeze. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder in vigils that illuminated the darkest corners of human cruelty. The Watts case was no longer a headline. It became a national scar. And yet, years later, whispers still circulate. Rumors born from speculation, misinterpretation, or the endless churn of the internet. Claims that he speaks of release. hints that he believes he may one day walk outside prison walls again. None supported by evidence, none validated by officials, but rumors, even baseless ones, have a way of igniting old fears, reminding people that evil once witnessed is never forgotten. These whispers spread because the case itself is a wound that refuses to close, because true crime audiences revisit the story the way survivors revisit nightmares, not to relive the horror, but to understand how a life so ordinary became a tragedy so unfathomable. The thought that the man responsible could ever hint at freedom, even in fantasy, stirs a reaction that is immediate and visceral. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Dark Crime Box, and turn on notifications. These stories take time, care, and deep research to handle respectfully. Your support ensures they continue. The years since sentencing have been filled with letters, prison interviews, and strange claims, some reflective, others manipulative. Behind bars, he lives in a world defined by routine, isolation, and the knowledge that the outside world will never forget what he did. Whether the rumor of his coming out soon began as a misunderstanding, a joke, or a twisted attempt at attention, it spread because people still fear the possibility of a monster returning from the dark. But the reality remains unchanged. His sentence is unmoving. His future is sealed. The rumors may rise, but the truth doesn't bend. The story ends not with freedom, but with questions that echo long after the narrative closes. How does an ordinary life unravel into unimaginable violence? How does a person hide such darkness behind a smile so convincingly? And how many warning signs are ignored every day in homes that appear picture-perfect from the outside? This case forces us to ask how well we ever truly know the people closest to us, and how far someone can drift before the world finally sees who they really are. If you made it this far, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Your support helps Dark Crime Box continue telling these stories with respect, depth, and truth. And now I'll leave you with the question at the center of this case. Do monsters reveal themselves suddenly, or do we create them by overlooking the shadows while they grow?